Evening everyone, as the sun is setting, we're going to be exploring the Fields of Ruin, doing a bit of a guided, commentated map tour. We will be getting 100% map completion here, footage submitted by TechZoon. And this is a really interesting, weird map because it's kind of a good amount regular charr map, but then also it sort of has a city baked into it. Now, as far as Guild Wars 2's release is concerned, most maps, cities, had their entire own dedicated play space. Like, Ratasum doesn't double up as an explorable area. It is just a city map. And the things you do for map completion there are more limited in that respect. Same for Lion's Arch and Divinity's Reach and Holbrach, Black Citadel, but here we've got a city area within a regular explorable. I get the feeling that ArenaNet had written this lore about Ebonhawke, a city down here, but didn't quite know whether they wanted to make it a full city, and then later on decided no, it shouldn't be, because it's in a very remote region of the world. Even though Guild Wars 2 of today, the Crystal Desert is accessible and so on, there's no direct route to the Crystal Desert from here. There's a gate that hints that maybe one day they would add a map, but they never have. And so Ebonhawke just feels very, very out of the way. It's connected to Divinity's Reach via a surrogate, which actually, for me, has always been my main method of getting here. I can't remember ever really adventuring through Plains of Ashford and then Blaze Ridge and so on to manually walk here. The way that the level of the maps is built is that you're probably going to be wading out of your depth if you try and walk directly to Ebonhawke in the early game, not using the Asura Gate. So it's connected via the gate, but again, it's just kind of a separate location. Mostly is visited by Vigil players, but if you're not playing a charr, and if you're not joining the Vigil, this whole area of the world is super easy to miss. Very disconnected from the Zaitan fight and everything really that happens. In that way, I kind of love it. As I mentioned in a previous video, the more remote it is, the more kind of cozy it feels to me. And especially to the east of the city, there's some nice ogre areas that we'll be visiting that are great. The one advantage of having it as a regular explorable with a city type area within it is they can really mix and match the content. Like here, we actually get to participate in Renown Hearts, and if you want map completion, you have to be doing this, in the city. So they can be combat stuff or they can be non-combat stuff. ArenaNet really went kind of hog wild with this and got to add a huge assortment of things. There's a trading post, a bank, there are crafting stations, most of the amenities that you could be looking for, but then also sometimes the streets do spill out in bloodshed as separatists who are angry at the forthcoming treaty with the charr make themselves heard and, you know, create some fights. Then there's other weird things as well. This map actually is amazing for lore. Or sorry, the city area is amazing for lore. Strewn all about it are a bunch of journals that tell the story of the fates of many of the human characters from the Eye of the North storyline. What happened to the Ebon Vanguard and those who'd gone north, how many of them ended up coming to settle here. Really incredible. It was a big candidate for one of the earliest videos I ever did with the game, so I always look at this place very, very, very warmly. There's a kind of hidden Easter egg where there is an organ you can play to open a secret room with a chest. Just behind us here, there's all these chickens. If you kill the chickens, there's a Legend of Zelda reference where you kill enough of them, eventually a really angry one that's invulnerable will start trying to peck you to death. So that's another cool hidden thing. The graveyard, which we're about to be headed to in a second, also has a really prominent area because it has the grave of Gwen Thackeray. I don't know whether you can really say that Guild Wars 1 had a main character. If it did, maybe that main character was Devonna, or some member of, you know, that adventuring band that's kind of like the Guild Wars 1 equivalent of Destiny's Edge. Maybe it's them. Maybe you can make an argument that it was Menlo, because he had a big role in 2 of the campaigns. But maybe it was Gwen. Gwen was a little girl when you first see her in Pre-Searing Ascalon. She returned in Eye of the North. She had a dedicated bonus mission pack story with her. She had a lot of post-release content in the Guild Wars Beyond campaigns. And then here at Ebonhawke, you actually get to find her grave, which we just channeled near. And they do something very sweet. They play the sound of a flute as you approach it, which is very nice and references the fact that in the original game, one of the very first things you ever did in Pre-Searing Ascalon was probably help this little girl get a flute, and you helped her get a cape and stuff as well. But they do that little flute cue, little sound effect there. So there's just so much to see there. Gwen actually ended up getting some references later on too. If you play Living World Season 4, you'll see more prominent stuff with Gwen. If you go to the Underworld, if you watch the previous video in this playlist, you saw I found an entrance to the Underworld. If you go in there, Gwen's ghost can kind of appear there. There's just loads going on. There, that point of interest we just got, that is the gate. The gate that has never opened. It's a lot like the Bandit Brisbane Bridge. I will try to not go on a massive tirade like I did in the Brisbane episode. But yeah, basically a suggestion. You know, look at the mini-map right there. Look at that suggestion of a road that goes right down there. Blatantly telegraphed, hey guys, community, we might extend the game south one day. And it's never happened. And I don't know at this point if it ever will happen. I spend a lot of time these days preoccupied with the thought of a Guild Wars 2 that doesn't deal with Elder Dragons. What kind of stories might it go into? What kind of places could we go? And I wonder whether maybe there's some kind of story they could hook into that would give us an excuse to open that gate. The thing is, I really feel like if a map was going to get added there, it needed to come in the Path of Fire era. Because in theory, it would connect to Path of Fire expansion maps. And if we're doing it in a way later era, is that not going to feel weird? Well, maybe not. Maybe it doesn't feel weird. Maybe they just pay extra care to how the maps connect and no one would really mind. I just can't think of many story justifications anymore. And I think that's a real shame because I always just wanted to go through that goddamn door. Well, there you have it. Moving along, that Quarry Heart was very handily beaten there by us. A lot of really nice dialogue, actually, and some dialogue that references Divinity's Reach. There's also, by the way, some really cool lore here. I had a friend that I played Guild Wars 2 with for a long time that was very obsessed with this fact. But there is a reference to someone worthy of the throne in Divinity's Reach. Would anything ever happen to Queen Jenna? And obviously nothing has happened to Queen Jenna as the story's gone along so far, so maybe it's all fine. But you never know. And during Season 2, there were some storylines that really seemed like maybe the throne would be under threat. They introduced this idea of an artifact. But a lot of those Season 2 stories ended up kind of getting dropped. Season 2 is a weird season in a lot of ways for that kind of stuff. You know, there were a few overhanging stories and characters and things that got introduced and seemed to tease or suggest they were going to be used later and then just weren't. Season 2 didn't really impact this map either much, nor did Season 1, so more contributing factors as to why maybe you as a player don't come here too much. There is at least this meta event, Ogre Wars, and you can see it's currently under the phase, killing the leaders at Sapper's Delve. Ogre Wars is one of these push-pull territory-style meta events, but instead of against centaurs, which is what most of them feel like they are, we're against the ogres instead. We're visiting their crawls. The ogres are really amazing for their lore. You know, they're very long-lived creatures. You can actually meet an ogre on this map that was relevant and around during Guild Wars 1's time, 250 years ago. I like them. I think they're quite sweet, the idea of them being with their pets and so on. And the meta has a reward attached to it called Sam, that is worth, or was worth, a lot of money back in the day. It's the same as if you saw my DS Plateau episode when we were talking about the Font of Rand mini dungeon, and there's a chest you could get there that would give you a very, very, very high-priced item. Well, this is another one of those items attached to the same collection. Very rare, and really, I remember having a lot of fun trying to get in it, but it's a complicated meta to, like, trigger and get started, and could always be a little bit frustrating. Here we are, the beautiful, very secluded, distant area of the world. There's something about the lighting here, the foliage. I know it's a little bit hostile because of the ogres being around, but it just feels really quiet. I like this place a lot. And maybe it will be forever quiet, especially if we don't get through that door. The other thing that might happen with that door, by the way, is if you guys noticed when Path of Fire expansion came out and they expanded the world map art, when they did that, they also expanded it a considerable amount to the east, which is just beyond this wall you're looking at. That eastern wall, we've never, in the history of the franchise, been able to go over that wall. That's, in theory, part of the Blaze Ridge mountain chain. We know that, like, ogres are from there, but there's basically no other information. And beyond even that is, like, the full supercontinent of Tyrian. It's just like a massive landmass. And at no point in all the years this franchise has existed have we ever got any really meaningful information about that place. But when Path of Fire came out, they expanded the world map so you can peek over there a bit in the art. You can't go there in game, but in the arts they did. So maybe when that door, and I know it's on the south, not the easterly wall, but maybe when that door opens, it will be with a view to getting us that way into the supercontinent one day. And if that ever happened, maybe this eventually would start feeling like a more central location to the world. Interesting idea, no? We've kind of skipped over some cool dynamic events there to deal with a Sylvari, that there tends to be a lot of incentive to go and deal with that Sylvari. A lot of collections end up asking you go there. Not sure why, really. The mechanics of the event itself are just a standard escort. But yeah, they ask you to go back to it in several different occasions. Down here, we got a nice charr outpost. We are, of course, in the Iron Legion lands, Iron Legion territory. But up until now, our exploration of the map has been human-centered areas. Well, now we get to find this place. I really like the layout of this fortress. And I especially like thinking about what this fortress meant when the war was still going on, when the siege lines were being drawn. This would have been, you know, such a terrifying, scary place for any human to have found themselves at. And yet, a couple of years later, you know, we can actually peaceably travel around. Lots of NPCs and cool things. I guess I like it again just because they've not really got much content there. So whenever I go, I get a bit wide-eyed and curious. It feels like a place that I've not spent enough time, even though there's a lot of detail there, if that all makes sense. Let's talk for a moment about Guild Wars 1 overlap as we head back towards the Ogre Wars area. This map, aside from like ore, okay, Guild Wars 1, you could not explore ore. So obviously when we get to ore in Guild Wars 2, that's all new. Okay, so aside from ore, this map is probably the map with the least connection to Guild Wars 1 of nearly all of them. Now, I know a couple of the videos in this series we've already seen have limited connection to Guild Wars 1, but there was always a chunk here or there where there was some overlap. Well, check this out. Look at that. There is almost no connection here for the vast majority of the map. It's only at the very northern rim that maybe we can consider ourselves to be possibly in some Guild Wars 1 territory. And you know what's amazing about that? That's pre-searing. I think in post-searing, you can't quite get that south. That's the Regent Valley. And you see how Shaman's marked a point of interest there called the Apple Orchard? That's because in Guild Wars 1 there was a quest where you could go and there's some spiders would attack you and so on. If you saw the very first episode of this series here in the playlist, and I recommend you guys do that, click the description for the playlist, it will just autoplay all of them together. But if you go back to the first one, ArenaNet added that Queensdale Apple Orchard in place of a village as a reference. And so this is where the original one was in Guild Wars 1, but it basically doesn't overlap anywhere, which I guess is a bit of a disappointment. I think even more curious than all of this is if the Fields of Ruin had been extended by ArenaNet slightly more to the west, where the Shiver Peaks actually come in a little bit. If they had done that, we might have been able to get another glimpse at the second Wizard's Tower. People forget this, but this franchise has 2 Wizard's Towers. There's the floating one that was originally seen near the Fisherman's Haven in Kryta and then got towed beyond the Dominion of Winds. And now we see it 250 years later by Garenhof. You can watch the Kessex Hills episode for that. But then there's another one, which only appeared in pre-searing Ascalon on the borders of Ascalon where they meet the Shiver Peaks. And ever since then, in post-searing, you can't find it. In no bonus mission pack stuff, not even here in Guild Wars 2. But the Fields of Ruin was one of their closest opportunities to do that. I think maybe if they'd pulled the Plains of Ashford south as well, there was maybe a chance. But ArenaNet opted not to, which has left that as a very mysterious location now. Very mysterious indeed. I'd love a Guild Wars 2 release that lets us go back there. And especially if it connects maybe the dwarves and stuff at the same time. Because that's kind of known as the Delgamore front here 250 years later. Anyway, I digress. Really, the Shiver Peaks and all that old human stuff is not the story of this map. This is the story of the siege lines and the war against Ebonhawke and what a sudden treaty and peace does to this area of the world. This is quite well overlapped, if not with Guild Wars 1, with one of the novels, the Ghost of Ascalon novel. A good chunk of it, maybe something like 9 to 10 chapters, maybe more, maybe slightly less, are set right here on this map as an adventuring band travels from Ebonhawke up north. I guess I'll be cagey about it and try to avoid spoilers for the novel. I assume that you guys watching this video don't care about spoilers for much of the main story because you probably experienced it, but that you might care about spoilers for the novel if you haven't read it yet, or this is my audiobook of it. But yes, that's always been a weird thing for me when exploring this map because the novel describes these regions quite differently. To tell you the truth, the novel also overlaps a good amount with the Plains of Ashford, but a large chunk of it's here, and there's very scary charr here at this time. I think the first time we ever meet Ritlock Brimstone was pre-release when he had a little moment in the novel here. You guys might be interested in that. You get to see how all the other charr react to him. This big badass. So where we find ourselves at the moment is right out the front of the gates of the city, which we didn't really get a good look at, but this is a very, very important vista, and I think a bit of a disappointment to most people. When you look up at the entrance, the front gate of Ebonhawke, it's supposed to be flanked by these really beautiful, specifically stylized, you know, hawks, I guess, that flank the gate. And the thing is that as good as they look in Guild Wars 2, and it is a nice sight, the original trailer opened with a very prominent moment in concept art of a camera panning up through Ebonhawke and like the sun glittering in as the gates like seem to open. You guys are probably familiar with the exact shot I'm talking about. And I remember people being disappointed because the in-game version really, as much as ArenaNet did well, taking the concept art and making it real, you know, Divinity's Reach and that shot from the first trailer is a perfect example of that. Sometimes they didn't quite hit the bar, and I guess with Ebonhawke, this is one of those times. I have to say, I find it hard to blame them. Ebonhawke's just not that important to the story of the game for core. You know, there's so much that they have to talk about with Lion's Arch and the Pact and Zhaitan. The treaty is kind of already underway. It's kind of a done deal, you know, as the story begins. It's not this game's plot. I kind of get the sense that the treaty only really exists because the devs knew that they wanted 5 playable races that weren't too antagonistic to one another. And they also wanted the charr. The charr had been a very special, unique thing to this franchise that people were familiar with from the start. The idea of playing a charr is a great idea. But they kind of had to resolve this problem with these 2 races that wasn't hooking into the Elder Dragon storyline that well. Maybe they could have gone a completely different way, where suddenly this treaty is integral to the Zhaitan plot. I wonder how that would have looked. It would have taken a lot of thought, and it would have warped the way that the personal story works very, very majorly. Instead, it's mostly just visual players that will be dealing with this. So, more hearts. Here we're helping pacify Tyler's bivouac for settlers, clear out predators and separatists. You also notice that despite it not being in the description up there, dealing with these griffins and going for resurrection is excellent for heart progress. It's particularly because of the way they ball up together in the nests. Now, you might have caught just a second ago, if you look very carefully at the griffin nests, you often find that they're filled with trinkets and stuff. And in that nest we just walked past there, one of the trinkets you can see is a very iconic, I can't remember, is it the shield of the lion? No, it's not the shield of the lion. But the shield, it was super iconic as a Guild Wars 1 shield. Appeared in so much art and material for Guild Wars 1. And you can kind of just find it hanging out there in some of the griffin nests. Not exclusively in that location, a lot of the other nests, it's the same. But hey. Alright, so finally we see something new. For the first time, we've taken 12 videos to reach it. But we are encountering the brand. The brand is a big part of all of the charr maps, but doesn't really feature in the Plains of Ashford, doesn't really feature in the Desert Plateau, but does in all the others. So this scar runs through many of the maps and is our only opportunity to interact with the branded, which, given everything else I've said, might make you realize something. There could be a good number of Guild Wars 2 players who actually got to level 80 and beat the game, the main story, who had never been to the brand and who had never actually fought any of the branded. Because if you weave through the right way, there is nothing that takes you here. Of course, I think many people watching this video around the time that it was produced are more than familiar with the branded. We've just come out of a big brand storyline, realistically, and we've been dealing with the Crystal Dragon a lot. But again, it's kind of de-emphasized here at launch. I have to say, I never really was that disappointed about the Ebonhawke doors. I appreciate where people were. But if I was disappointed by anything, it is the brand. The descriptions we had from it in the novels and just, you know, the devs establishing the world were just so good. They set such a bar that there's no way the game itself could really have delivered on unless the entire game was about the brand. But it was more of a horrific, abominable, like, mutated land than I think we ended up getting in-game. I'm sure they did very well, you know, it is stormy and it is dark and it is cloudy. But there's a sense of scale as well you got from the novels that the game can't ever really catch up to. Like, there's a moment in one of the novels where we're in the middle of the brand and they talk about how, like, it's a day's march to get out in one direction and a day's march on the other side. And in-game, you just can't get that. You can walk through it in mere moments. This, again, overlaps with Ghost of Ascalon, a very special place. I remember a great many posts, people like crying and being emotionally affected by this hero challenge here. I'm not joking. And why? Well, because that is the final resting place of a character from the novels. I'll leave it there so that you guys don't feel too spoiled or whatnot. But actually, one of the other characters from the novel can still be found alive wandering around there. And the idea of it is that it's just one nice, happy grotto where some life can cling on, surrounded otherwise by the horrible brand here. As much as I've just kind of criticized it and said it was a bit of a disappointment, I do think they have a really lot of badass assets. This is a place that's well worth hanging out just to get extra dialogue, particularly the little village behind me, directly behind me, has a lot of fun stuff. I think I dedicated a moment in my personal story Let's Play to giving you guys a special tour of that, because there is some nice world building that I think a lot of people miss. This lake here actually has gone through multiple changes as the game's gone along. This particular dynamic event, which features, I think, or at one point featured multiple champions at once. Was that the stick here? It even now looks pretty cool and interesting. You can see that there's actually this big, strange crystal. And I think if we break that champion's strange crystal there, the thing that's sealed within it breaks out. Very reminiscent of an old Guild Wars 1 thing in the Jade Sea. In the Elite mission in the Jade Sea, and in fact, just wandering around the Jade Sea sometimes, you would find all kinds of creatures encased in the Jade. And in one of the Elite missions, you walk forward and a big worm actually ends up bursting out. Very, very cool moment. And I guess they kind of do a similar thing here with the brand. It is actually kind of funny. The brand kind of freezes the water in some ways around here into crystal. Very similar to what we saw in Cantha. I wonder if the devs made it a very specific point to show that this is still water, just to differentiate the two events, you know. It may be true that eventually they reveal the impact of the Jade Wind and everything that happened there was Elder Dragon associated, but for now, it's certainly not. Look at this outpost. Look at how cool this is. Sentinel Perch. It's such a hellish, horrible place, but you can come inside. Oh, and it feels so safe and awesome here, and you even have to get up to this vista. It almost pains me. I know that in this series, we can't talk to every NPC and we can't watch every vista because we'd just be going on for so long. You'd see the true length of the game unveiled if we did that. But it almost pains me to see us go through there and not just have a quick chat with some of the charr. These maps could be weird, you know, where you speak to a charr, it will give you an environmental item that does extra damage to branded. I know that appears somewhere around here. One of the big event chains actually in the brand way off to the south has some really strange stuff going on with it in terms of map telegraphs and icons that feel like they were maybe going to be used for world versus world at some point but weren't, but got hooked onto this dynamic event, and so now you just see all this weird UI that does not fit in with the rest of the game at all. I recommend you guys check that out, especially if you're doing more precursor collections. Because I think the only reason I went there recently was because of one of those. The precursor collections have come up a lot in these videos, and you know what? I think that's a testament to how well they were made, certainly, in that they diversified the kind of places that people went to. You know, all these areas of the maps that don't have map completion objectives, but have cool events people probably miss. The precursor collections come along to save the day, even if they're only once lifetime, you know. So much of Guild Wars 2 is account bound and once lifetime. It fits kind of well. So here at the very northern boundary of the map, where we are right now, this Renegade Camp, actually a really substantive moment can happen here in the story. This is where the leader of the Renegades, Ajax, son of Almora, founder of the Vigil, can actually be killed. There are two separate places where that character can potentially be taken out based on your choices in the personal story. It can either be here, where you're in this exact cave, this exact environment, just in a personal story step, and you can kind of rush on up and kill him. You find him at the top of these stairs on the left. Or if you make a different decision, you'll find him more central to the map at a big treaty tent, which we haven't seen yet on the video, and I'm looking forward to getting to, because it's, again, a place filled with cool information and stuff going on to do with specifically the treaty being forged between humans and charr. So, yeah, that's what I think about with this cave all the time. It's interesting, in much more recent story with the Icebrood saga, the circumstances of that character's death and who they were in life came back again. And I was wondering if the Fields of Ruin or maybe this cave or something would get referenced, but because the devs have no way of knowing what your character picked, well, they do have a way of knowing, but it's just too much effort to go to. I think they kind of keep the circumstances of his death really generic. But in theory, it's an important area of the world. This place right here. And we can finish the harp very efficiently there, actually backing out of the cave, but still having one final charr to kill. So now we get to swing east, check out the other corner. I remember there's a lot of stuff to do with harpies here. A jumping puzzle that's kind of not a jumping puzzle. But when they added the Chukun Champawat's legendary shortbow with Heart of Thorns, this was actually one of the places that quest line would take you to. And I think the jumping puzzle had purpose after that. I guess we'll see when we get a little bit closer. But yeah, so Roscoe's campsite at the very north of the map. There are 2 exits out, one in the Brand or right next to the Brand, the other's here. They both will lead you to the same place, deeper into the Charlands with Blaze Ridge Steps, which is a very cool map, kind of equivalent to Queensdale. Looking forward to that video. But we're not there just yet. I guess ArenaNet added 2 entrances just because it would feel a little bit more natural. They really didn't have to. I suppose it's a bit like how Queensdale has 2 entrances to Keswick or whatever. No skin off of their back. So yeah, up here in this corner, we have the Harpy Heart. You can see a suspicious rat running around. That's very similar to the barrels that I was talking about when we were in Gendaran Fields. One of the guild bounties can trigger, and you need to deal with all of these suspicious rats. What's the story? That he's hiding as a rat? I can't remember. Is it a Mesmer that's hiding as a rat? Is that why you have to deal with all of them? Someone will pop out, though, if you find the right one, and you've got to travel around actually trying to figure them all out. The heart itself, this is the way I always do this heart too. You can just fight all of the harpies, and you're going to be inclined to because you want to come up here for the hero challenge anyway. But there is a side to this heart where you've actually got to corral the bulls back into their pens. We haven't really seen that interaction much in this series. The previous time that I remember talking about it was in Diessa with the chickens that you could move back in. Well, that kind of reappears here. You can see if you read on the top right, but just doubling up the hero challenge plus killing harpies is probably going to be the fastest way to deal with this. I guess we're kind of lucky, actually. There's probably more enemies that have spawned around here right now just because an event's triggered here too. Rescue the villagers and defeat the harpy kidnappers. I feel like the harpies did not get enough extra information about them in Guild Wars 2. They appear very regularly around the game, but their story is very, very, very shallow. There's a really cool hint that maybe the race of creatures of which the god Dwayna belongs might have once lived here in abundance or something, but they fell from grace somehow, and harpies is what you end up with. And there's even some weird cool hints about that down south in the Alona region where also harpies are around. But Guild Wars 2 never really took those ideas or did much with them. Maybe ArenaNet just doesn't like the idea. But it leaves the harpies with very little to talk about. I mean, in terms of gameplay, I mostly hate them. Probably because of Fractals of the Mists, where one particular fractal, a Suratheme fractal, has you jumping up these little platforms, while harpies with knockbacks and rapid fire shots can absolutely destroy you if you don't go prepared. I remember the early days, I used to really struggle with that. Now, not such a big deal, but back then, oh my god. And I guess their voices, the screeching that they do, pretty iconic for the game now, but hey. So the event we're next to right now is one of my favorites in the whole game. Collect Griffin Feathers for the flying machine. I mentioned in one of the other char maps where we got to see the Iron Barracuda submarine and how the submarine would end up being important for the story later. Similar thing here. There's a very cool story where a char wants to build a machine that can fly. They want the Griffin Feathers, you gather them, and there's a whole animation of them like doing a test run and piloting this thing. It flies in the sky, but it fails a little bit, crashes into a wall and breaks down. Later in the game, you find that the technology is perfected and charcopters become a really big thing going forwards. This thing that is being built here is not actually a charcopter, it's a different design. It's like a helicopter with the long tail and another mini rotor on the back. But even those you do find in other places as the game goes along, as this technology is perfected. And I really like that about the char maps, that sense of being able to see early in the timeline these maps, technologies that actually end up working out in the battle against the Elder Dragon, our ultimate destination, or of which the final videos in this playlist will be located. So it's brilliant to see, and a bit of a shame that if you stand around for long enough, you'll see it's just on this eternal loop of trying to build it. It crashes and fails after you give the feathers, and then trying to build it again, and then it will crash and fail again. Don't worry, eventually it will work out. The lake to the north that we just nabbed that point of interest, also pretty interesting. They did a whole update known as current events updates. So these are kind of like Living World style update, season 1 style updates, but years after Living World season 1, where they could tell these side stories. There's a really wild side story that was being told here, basically to do with rifts appearing on Tyrian and time travel, it seems, that got referenced again recently in the Icebrood saga, but still has no definitive answers. I can't help but be near that lake now and remember that patch with those strange portals and the obscure mechanics that were going on there. So where we are now, and just hastily finished a heart, this is the Delegation of the Legions. There are 2 delegations on the map. One for the humans, one for the legions, and they meet in this giant tent in the middle, which is its own point of interest, Summit Peak. At Summit Peak, there is so much dialogue. So many things you can ask people about because it's dealing with such a profound thing, how to negotiate this treaty between the humans and the charr now that the Claw of the Kana has actually been recovered. Really, my favorite thing about this map, if not Ebonhawke itself, is coming over to this tent and seeing what the people have to say. It's the shining jewel in the crown of the Vigil missions, which, to be honest, are generally not that good, but at least you get all of this. And, of course, there's a heart to follow up as well for the human delegation down here. Dealing with actually some much broader area of the map and way tougher dynamic event. I mean, look at this. A champion wasp soldier and a champion wasp queen at once. I guess ArenaNet liked to associate wasps with the humans in a weird way. I mean, there's that wasp event back in Queensdale. I wonder if the dev was like, what kind of events can be here for the human stuff? And looked at the human map for inspiration, and the wasp was what came out. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit of a far-fetched theory there. Running around actually just interacting with the nest instead of doing the event is absolutely the way to go, because that is pretty dangerous as an area. I kind of wonder if the devs could have done a bit more here. Maybe had a full-on meta event that related to Summit Peak and the two delegations. You know, you need to make sure both delegations are really happy and in good affair, and they come together to fight against a common enemy that threatens the treaty, and we end, you know, with even more respect for one another than we had before. That would have been pretty good. But they went with the ogre thing, so, you know, there's only so many metas that they can throw per map. That's actually the last heart of the map we've just completed there. And we're going towards these peculiar yellow flowers. I don't actually remember what relation they have to the heart. Do we gather them and take them to an alchemist or a dye maker or something, maybe? Or is the idea that... Oh, maybe the idea is that the wildlife has got really hostile because it's eating these flowers, and we need to gather them up to stop them being hostile. Was that the story? God, I'm actually getting kind of hazy on these details. I don't remember the last time I sincerely sat down and worked on that heart. With that done, I guess a minor bit of inefficiency here. We did miss probably the most central waypoint to the entire map, right here on the road that leads out of Ebonhawke. And there's this outpost at the south of the brand here we're heading to now, Doom Spy's Watch. This is where, if you hang around long enough, you can find events that have really weird telegraphs, like the World vs. World stuff that I was talking about. But check it out, there's Ebon Vanguard defending an old broken down charr fortification that was ruined, it seems, for being on the edge of the brand. That alone is a very cool story and cool idea for a setting. So there you have it, guys. That's the Field of Ruin. Absolutely chock-a-block with cool stories to do with the humans and the charr, and there'll be more to come. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to check out Discord. Trying to push people over there. It's in the description if you're looking for more content, like-minded people. And until next time, guys, take it easy.